Okay, I think we can just go ahead and get started with introductions, and as folks come in, they can catch up. So welcome everybody. This is the Wildlife Conservation Board's meeting just on our general grant guidelines. My name is Rebecca Friss. I'm the Assistant Executive Director, and I'm just going to start with a welcome. We're going to do some introductions. I'm going to set the context, and then I'm going to pass it over to Shannon just to run through a very brief slideshow about our new guidelines, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And we're going to ask that you put Q&A in the chat to manage the questions that way. So we'll get to that at the end. But again, thank you for joining us. WCB success is all about your success, all our partner success, and we very much enjoy working with all of you and are super excited to get back out in the field with you. So first, just to introduce the team, I already introduced myself, but I want to also introduce Joe Navari, who is our acquisition supervisor. And so he'll be here to answer questions. And then we also have our two restoration supervisors, which are Scott McFarlane and Shannon Lucas. And Shannon's going to be doing the presentation for us. And then this team will be answering your questions at the end. And if you have questions after the fact, these are also the folks that you could go to for additional questions. But just to set the context, WCB has been, of course, doing restoration, acquisition, access projects here now for 75 years. This year's our 75-year anniversary, so we'll be celebrating that later in the year. But, we updated our strategic plan in 2019. And so we're still, our main priorities have been pretty consistent. And so what we're looking for with our new projects is also very consistent, which is protecting biodiversity, implementing projects that support climate resilience, working on connectivity for species and corridors, and then also where appropriate, having access for all to those places. So those are still our priorities moving forward. And of course, we're very much interested in helping support the 30 by 30 plan, which will be coming out here shortly after its revisions. And those are still our priorities. So if your first question is, well, what are you guys looking for? I mean, those are the types of things that we're looking for. And the projects that check most of those boxes are going to be the ones that raise to the top for us as we move forward. And why are we doing these general guidelines now? So, we're really looking to streamline our processes. So I think you may know that WCB has 15 different programs that have been implemented over different periods of time. We also have gotten different bond funding over time and had gotten into a situation where we were doing numerous solicitations each year and doing kind of annual solicitations. And now we're moving into a period where we're going to have some more general fund dollars that are a little bit more flexible. So we really wanted to cut the green tape, streamline our process, and kind of get back to the old way that WCB used to do projects, which is, having one continuous open application process. And that's what we'll be going through today a little bit more. But, if we can streamline our process, hopefully that's easier for you. You guys don't have to kind of worry about when the solicitation is coming out or what program to apply for. Instead, you just give us a pre-app and we kind of take it from there. And it also gives us the ability to really help develop projects and have our staff help develop projects with you guys. So, that's the context of kind of why we're doing this. We're very excited to get back to this more continuous process with our partners, which also includes getting out on the ground with you guys and really helping develop projects. So with that, we just have a short PowerPoint that Shannon's going to go through. And then, as I mentioned, we'd like you to put some questions into the chat that we can then answer after the fact. So Shannon, I will pass it to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Shannon Lucas, and I'm a Restoration and Development Supervisor. Let's see. Okay. So this presentation is just going to go over some of the highlights of the guidelines. I'm going to provide an overview of the application process, and then at the end, we'll have some questions and answers. So as Rebecca mentioned, our new process is that we will be accepting applications continuously. It's a continuously open process. So you can send a pre-application at any time, as opposed to some of our previous processes where we had a formal solicitation where all proposals were due on a particular date and time. And also, as Rebecca mentioned, our process now has 2 steps. It's a pre-application and a full application. Most importantly, though, now WCB staff are able to consult with applicants throughout the entire application process. Before the pre-application, during the development of the application, it's meant to be collaborative and iterative. So as opposed to in the past, under some formal solicitations, staff could only communicate with applicants during a particular window of time. And then finally, as Rebecca also mentioned, applicants don't need to determine which program they're applying to. All you do is submit a pre-application, and then WCB staff will determine what's the most appropriate program and what may be the most appropriate funding source. A few other key changes. Thanks to the passage of AB 379, we are now able to give grants to tribes unless a particular bond fund source does not list them as eligible entities. But for most of our funding, we would be able to give grants to tribes. For restoration and development projects, a change now is that we will only allow indirect costs to be applied to the grantee staff time and the fringe benefits. Previously, we allowed indirect on things like mileage, materials, and supplies, and things like that. And then finally, for acquisition proposals, they no longer require a conceptual area protection plan or a land acquisition evaluation. Any project can submit a pre-application for an acquisition project. So here's a flowchart of a general grant application process. First, applicant will submit a pre-application, and then WCB staff will review and consult with the applicant. And if it is recommended, the staff will request a full application. Once that's submitted, our staff will review the application and generally conduct a site visit. And then WCB staff and a CDFW regional staff person where the project is located will all score the application, and it may be recommended for a future board approval. And then staff will work with the applicant to prepare the project for a future board meeting. And then staff will recommend the project at a board meeting and the board may approve it. If they do, staff will work with the grantee on the grant agreement. And then finally, for restoration and development projects, that will result in a notice to proceed and the project can start. And for acquisitions, that's when the project closes. As many of you are probably aware, WCB has 4 meetings per year: February, May, August, and November. And it takes several months for staff to prepare a project for a board meeting. So keep that in mind when you're submitting your applications. For example, if you submit an application in January, don't expect to be on the February board meeting agenda. And that is all I have. I'd like to get to the questions. As Rebecca mentioned, please put them into the chat so we can manage them. Please also try to keep your questions general. If you have project specific questions, please just contact Scott or me or Joe to talk about them. And oh, one final thing too, our pre-application is not quite available. We're still making some last minute tweaks, but we hope it will be available to you all to download and submit in the middle of this month. So that is all I have.
Yeah, and I can help moderate some of the questions. So the other thing we just should have said is that, yes, this is being recorded and we will post a copy of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint on our website. And also right now, you know, there is just one place on our website where you can go to see all this information and be able to access that pre-application starting April 18th. And then, you know, after April 18th, there is no deadline as far as, you know, when you need to get your application in, but we will be taking them on our, you know, we'll be screening those as they come in, and it's going to be kind of dependent on staff availability and capacity and as to how quickly we will then look at those pre-applications. We've set kind of a 45-day initial deadline for ourselves, depending if we really get inundated first off, but hope to really have that down, like where if you put in a pre-app, you would hear within a month from us, you know, whether or not that pre-app is moving forward. So let's see, another question that came through is just if tribes include non-federally recognized, and yes, the definition of us working with tribes is California Native American tribes which is a broader definition than just federally recognized. And so those are things I saw in the Q&A. Let me move over to the chat. And if others want to help chime in. Another question is how applications will be prioritized if there's multiple acquisitions. And again, that's, kind of an internal discussion where we have a checklist of, which key goals is it meeting, where is it meeting in our strategic plan. Other things that may come into consideration for prioritization would be, has, previous funding been put into this project? What are the kind of the partners included in this project? What is the readiness of a project in a geography? So we have kind of an internal checklist for our selection process that would then determine kind of which projects are prioritized over other projects. That will be an ongoing internal conversation.
I can take the next one. That's easy.
Good.
Yes, applicants can submit multiple pre-applications for different projects.
Yes. So just keep them all separate. The general timeline, again, we're looking to look at pre-apps, within a month or so of time frame. But then after that, you'll have, have a full application, which then will require a period of time. We'll give you a period of time to fill out a full app, and then the full app needs to be reviewed, prioritized, and then decided if we're moving forward. So that's a several month process still. Yeah, so we don't want to give you guys the impression that you can turn in a pre-app April 19th and go to our May board meeting. Like, that's not going to be realistic. And even at this point, getting to an August board meeting might be a little bit more challenging.
Well, and also during the full application process, as I mentioned, because staff can consult with applicants during that, there may be several different, we may review the full application and say, oh, actually, this needs to be changed, so that depending on how iterative it is, that could also be a factor in how long it takes.
Right. Can letters of support be included? I don't think we're really looking for letters of support at the pre-application phase. That would be something better for a full application.
Another question on here is, could counties apply? This one was particularly to weed control agencies. The answer is yes. Governmental entities can apply.
Can a single project include both planning and technical assistance activities, or should that be proposed as two projects?
I think it is a pre-application. It's okay to put the two things together. That's going to be our job once we get the pre-application, to better consult with the applicants on how to submit their full application. If we think it needs to be separated into two separate projects, we would provide that guidance.
Okay, yeah, and here's a question about kind of things we've been working on in the last couple of months. If a pre-app was submitted in February, does it still need to be reviewed in mid-April? I think we need to take this as a case by case, because we have this kind of interim period of where we've been chatting with people, or people have called us and talked about projects. So, get back with whoever you are working on with that pre-app in particular, and they can let you know if they feel like we need to put it into the system. Because we are just now setting up kind of the intake where everybody will send download the form, the pre-app form, fill it out and send it to an email. And then we have a system to catalog and keep track of all those pre-apps through a SharePoint site. So we may want that to be the case, but we'll work with you specifically on that. Those are a couple questions on that.
So the next one I see is, will there be an opportunity to review and comment on a draft pre-application before you finalize it? I think generically the answer is yes, because conversations can be had during the entire time, and there's nothing to prevent you from calling us before you submit your pre-application to talk about your project as well, if you'd like any additional feedback prior to submitting it.
And then, does regional support from the Department of Fish and Wildlife come from the regional manager? Generally, yes, we will be reviewing grant applications and with the regions as one of the reviewers of the full application.
Yeah, and just to speak to again, the next one too about CDFW's involvement in this. We always encourage that you're checking in with the regions, especially on the acquisition side where we have had that process of developing the CAPs and LAEs. So we would encourage you to have that engagement as soon as possible. We will make sure that they're looking at full apps and are providing, the regional managers are aware of, especially on the acquisition side, what we're looking to do in the specific Fish and Wildlife region. So I think you can pretty much continue engagement with them as you have in the past, and just know that they will be providing input on our full applications.
And from a restoration standpoint, the only time a letter of support is needed from the Department of Fish and Wildlife is if you're going to work on department-owned lands. And we would need that letter of support along with the full application if you get to that point.
There's
So-
no, oh, go ahead.
Okay.
There's no maximum request. Generally, I mean, if it was a just giant ask, we would have to, figure out some sort of matching component. But in general, there's no maximum request especially for acquisitions. And moving forward, we might be looking at some of the larger scale landscape size projects. So keep that in mind, especially with acquisition.
And as
Yeah.
far as,
Go ahead, Scott.
I was gonna say, as far as restoration goes, again, there's no maximum on that as well. I've kind of taken the pre-application or suggested to folks that you kind of ask for what you really want. It'll be our job to guide you to what's the most competitive full application that you can submit. So maybe it'll be everything you've asked for, or maybe we'll pare it down to things that are more important to WCB.
Yeah, and you'll also potentially be asked to add to your request, right? So we almost have I feel like we're almost more in a situation where we have a minimum request where, because of staff capacity, we can't do $150,000 projects, right? So we're actually looking at this point to maybe larger projects and larger asks. But again, this is something that we would talk with you guys through after the pre-application came in, and if we were going to ask for a full application, that would be part of that consultation conversation.
So review by local staff will definitely be part of the application process.
Do one of you guys want to speak to indirect?
I can just say that our current guidance is provided from a recent audit of another state agency, the Department of Finance, and this was the best suggested path forward for the way we manage indirect costs.
And from an acquisition standpoint, WCB has never allowed indirects.
Okay, Joe, do you have the next one? What are requirements for land acquisition appraisals?
They are the same requirements that are given to us by the Department of General Services. If there is federal money involved, you will still have to do Yellow Book. The appraisal requirements are not changing at all. They'll be the same as our appraisal policy right now will still be in effect. You can find that on our website. The appraisal policy basically outlines for higher appraised values, we have to do a little bit more review and have it independently reviewed by another appraiser at times. So you always want to factor in that appraisal policy into your timing for projects, especially if you're targeting, say, an August board meeting and you haven't started the appraisal review process on a project that's, say, 15 million. It can be difficult to make that deadline. So.
Yeah, so on the next one, I think I had mentioned at the beginning that, we do have kind of selection criteria that go beyond just the technical review scores that a proposal gets. And right now, our priorities, I think are reiterated is really kind of those that are hitting protection of biodiversity and including threatened and endangered species, those that are really hitting on climate resilience, those are hitting on wildlife corridors or connectivity, as well as having some type of access component And also it does, our priorities may change kind of year to year, depending on the type of funding that we have. So for example, this year we actually have some money specific to StreamFlow. So there is an addendum to the guidelines that talk specifically about StreamFlow projects that we're looking to receive. So I think we'll continue to kind of highlight, our existing priorities as well as changing priorities based on the type of funding that we receive. So we, again, we'll get some, or propose to get some additional money in this next budget cycle. And again, that's tied to climate resilience and also in some cases to drought. So those are the types of things to look at and then those are the types of things we're looking at internally to prioritize what we're going to fund.
Hey, Rebecca, there was a couple of other questions put in the Q&A.
Okay.
I don't know if we want to go back to those or.
Yeah, we'll go through these and then go back to the Q&A.
So the next one's, I think Joe can answer it, but I think we all could answer it, that yes, we are accepting conservation easement applications.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. For 30 by 30 goals, it's both easements and acquisitions, and we do a lot of both. So looking for new easements and acquisitions.
And you're welcome, Landon. Thank you for the shout out.
Indirect costs again.
Well, project management costs are different. Those are billable hours direct to a project. So if those hours can be directly billed to a project, then they are included in the grant. Those are not considered indirect costs.
So yes, we do. There are other parts of the proposal where you can ask for coverage for administrative and project management costs.
So if it's admin costs, of a bookkeeper doing the invoicing, things like that, their hourly charges can be directly charged to the project.
Right. I think we already spoke to why there is a change in the indirect situation, but you can talk directly with one of the supervisors more after if you'd like. I think we've talked to CDFW involvement. So just, and Joe can also add in on this, but where there are existing caps, that is a benefit for those acquisitions, because that's basically where you have, kind of a regional prioritization of those lands. So that's a good thing if you're in a cap, and that would just be information you put into your application. And that basically does give it a little bit of a leg up because it already has that Fish and Wildlife buy-in and regional prioritization. So we don't want to lose any of the good work that has been done in existing caps.
And the same thing could be said for HCPs and NCCPs, any kind of environmental planning document that has already established a need, especially for teeny species or any other kind of habitats.
Next question, is there a restriction on discussing proposals with staff after a certain time in the process? And that answer is no. You can talk to us anytime you want, before the pre-app, between the pre-app and full app, after you submit your full app.
And the next one, we don't have any match requirements for any of our projects. So we still are, in times are supportive of having cost share, and we do, end up being matched for other projects where federal dollars are involved at times, but we don't have any requirement for that. So that's one thing that we haven't ever had to do, is actually have some kind of requirement for match. But we do like to see that you're working with multiple partners or working with the community. And if you can bring cost share to the table, that's a good thing, but it's not required. And
secured cost share, especially for acquisition projects, is will definitely rank higher than unsecured cost share. A lot of the time we wait a long time to make sure that match is secured. So if you have a signed grant agreement already, or you have a donation agreement for a bargain sale, for example, include that in your full application, or write in the application to that effect.
And then the next question is, where can I find examples of previously funded projects? All of our agendas are on our webpage, and you can go through those. There's about a 99.9% chance that all those projects were approved. And can nonprofits apply? The answer is yes. And I believe it's written in the guidelines if you look in there, but it's pretty broad spectrum. It's state, federal, local governments, nonprofits, tribes. Certain funding sources do allow private landowners. So private landowners can submit an application. If we can find a right funding source for it, it can go forward. And is there anybody else I'm missing? No, I think it pretty much covers the full gambit.
Yeah, so, our website is wcb.ca.gov. We have a meetings page, and that's where you're going to see the agenda for all of our past board meetings. And so right now, we're funding like 20 to 40 projects each quarterly meeting, and the description of the projects, the dollar amounts, the folks, who's received the funding is all in those meeting agendas, and those are all online.
And if you want to be certain that the project was approved, the minutes are also listed there with the video of the more recent board meetings. Prior to that, it was all in text, but you can find out whether or not projects were approved.
For the appraisal question, I would reference our appraisal policy and the DGS requirements. If you need those, you can contact me directly, and I can send those to you for appraisal requirements, which could, might change in the future based on the WCB appraisal policy that our board approves. But we haven't changed it yet. It still stands at that $5 million threshold for independent review. All appraisals are reviewed by the Department of General Services.
The next one I see is, can you provide some detail on the block grant category? And the block grants, we've done a few in the past. They're somewhat relatively new to us. Before you submit a pre-application, I highly recommend you give one of us a call so we can talk you through the process a little bit and see if it's something that is applicable to this situation. So it is kind of an evolving thing, so I don't really want to overcommit to anything at this point.
Yeah, I can speak to the Desert Conservation Program. It was approved and is a program now at WCB, but was not provided funding in the first year. So we are just hopeful that something may come through in the governor's budget that will be coming out this July. But at this point, we don't have specific designated funds to that program. So keep an ear out and see how that plays out here in the May revise and this year's budget.
Anybody want to tackle the NICRA rate?
Yeah, we don't follow the NICRA rates. We're just sticking with that 20% overhead rate in general.
Part of that is to keep everybody on the same competitive level playing field as they apply. And if you do have a rate that goes above 20%, you're welcome to use that as match. Granted, we won't be reimbursing you for it. I know that's what you want, but it's still some perk to the project.
And then I can speak to urban. We're definitely still looking to expand out kind of our partnerships, work more in urban conservation and understand what that means. So this is, I think, a continued priority, and we do have board members that are really interested in us working more in disadvantaged communities as well. So that's just something we're going to continue to focus on and explore. So if you have ideas or partners to help us kind of continue to explore how to work in more of an urban setting, we'd be open to hearing about that.
I could take the next indirect question. Yes, we still do not allow indirect costs to be applied to subcontractors.
Generally, endowment costs are not funded by WCB, but they do count as match in acquisition applications.
Thank you for all the positive comments too. Yes, it would be. It would be helpful to mention other funding sources that you've applied to for potential match.
Yeah, there's actually a box in the pre-application for you to fill out who your matching funders are.
I don't think we have a large number of kind of alternate projects right now, so I would just check back with whoever you were chatting with. If you feel like you're on that alternate list, and we can help you move forward on whether or not you need to resubmit something. And, I think for the next one about, do we have specific monies to 30 by 30 in the climate resilience package, where we received a small amount of money this year and are slated to potentially get additional money next year and the year after. It does specifically mention 30 by 30, but I would say in general, with all the acquisition and easements that we do, that, we already were doing 30 by 30. And so we plan to just continue that, and we'll, up our emphasis on those types of activities to help meet those 30 by 30 goals.
Next questions about whether or not the pre-application is significantly different from the previous pre-application. And no, they're very similar. The new one is actually slightly shorter in the fact that we don't ask you to identify your different task items in your budget. So it's a little bit simpler.
And it has more drop-down menus as opposed to just typing stuff in.
Thank you, Tracy. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, and if Shannon, you want to just put up the contact slide again while we continue, that'd be great. And so the other place to actually get more information, if you look on our website and you see that we have, all of our different program pages, those program pages also have a program manager contact. So if you want to talk even more specifically on a specific program, go to the program page and contact that specific manager. But just know that you could also contact any of us to talk about, and we may end up just referring you to the specific program manager if you have some additional specific questions. But we're just really encouraging that you just reach out and go ahead and chat with us, and we can kind of get you to the right place to get your questions answered.
Rebecca, about the programs, somebody asked a question about the programs in the Q&A area.
Okay. Yeah, so, like we said, we have this general fund, a good amount we have some existing bond funds left, and some of those are more program specific, but then we also have this general fund, which can go across any number of our programs, right? So in the climate resilience package, it talks about doing restoration and acquisition, and it's talking about doing that across numerous habitat types. So you can review the individual programs, but we're not asking you to try to say, oh, I'm in, I'm asking for funding under riparian program, or I'm asking for funding under wetland program. We don't need to do that. That's what we're trying to do, is get a more streamlined process where you can just say, I have a restoration project, I have an acquisition project, and you can just submit that. And then we will internally decide which program we will categorize it under. And of course, there may be times where it's cross program, but you guys don't need to do a huge amount of kind of research or selection as to what program you think you fall within.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe.
Go ahead, Scott.
I just wanted to add that in the past with like Proposition 68, we had a Sierra Cascades program that did a lot of restoration work and acquisitions along the Sierras. With the new funding, those same projects can be done, but there's no longer geographical limitations to where you can do it, just that it's within the state of California. So I just wanted to open that up a little bit.
And I was going to say, our funding is also changing all the time. Our various pots of money for certain programs, for example, like the Oaks program hasn't had any money since 2010, but there's other pots of money we can use for Oaks projects. So keep in mind that, one of the historic pots of money that we used to have may be gone, but there might be a new pot that can do the same kind of project. So keep that in mind as well.
And then the other question, just to finish out the Q&A here, was a ballpark minimum application amount. Scott gets to decide.
I mean, it changes as our funding sources go, and as the state budget goes. There's if you can look in the governor's budget and see what we're going to be getting, but whether or not that changes one way or the other, who knows? But right now we are looking for larger projects, because we do have a limited staff capacity to do projects, and I would think that it's something above $500,000 would be a pretty good starting point.
And for acquisition, you could go a lot higher as a starting point.
Well, you can certainly go a lot higher for us too, but
Yeah.
there'll be certain projects we won't be able to consider that are really a low cost project, just because we don't have the staff capacity, unless it's a really low cost project with a huge impact somehow. Maybe we're the last piece of a large project that needs just a little bit of match. That might be worth it to us. Again, there's not a technical disqualification for the amount of ask in a pre-application.
Yes, and that applies to acquisition as well. Quite often we have Section 6 grants where the state is only putting forth 25% of the overall value, you know, so that could be relatively low, but the cost of the project could be very high.
Okay, and then there's a question about the link to the pre-app. We'll send it out on our front page, and it should be very obvious kind of where to go to how to apply, but we don't have the pre-application form up yet. We're kind of making sure we have the ability to take all the information in and organize it properly. So that pre-application form will not be linked until April 18th. So at that point, you should be able to find it right from the front page, and actually any of the program pages should all point back to that same pre-app place.
And I do see there's a question on that. Would planning projects also have the $500,000 minimum? I mean, again, there's no technical minimum, and it's going to go with our different funding sources. I would say apply. There might be an opportunity that we could try and put multiple planning projects together as a kind of a mini block grant type of a thing. We could get more impact out of the project. There's just a lot of unknowns. So just bring the questions to us and talk to us, and we'll let you know if it's something we can help you with.
Yeah, I would say that is the bottom line. You know, WCB is a relatively small staff. We do work statewide, but we do want to basically hear from you, and we can let you know up front, you know, the chances of whether we have appropriate funding and how well your project meets our priorities. And that's what you'll get if you put in the, you know, the short pre-app. Then we'll have that conversation of whether or not we think it's worthy to go through to the full app phase. And then, you know, and then if it scores well and again meets the selection criteria, then we would be able to go to a board meeting. So might have to have a little bit of patience just initially if we really get inundated, because we've been kind of in this interim period, you know, where we've kind of finished out the annual solicitations that we're doing, and now we're moving into this new process. But know that, you know, we're going to be looking for projects here and through the next couple of years, since we do expect to get a good amount of general fund dollars to spend on all these priorities. So it's pretty exciting. It's going to be an exciting time, but be patient with us as we kind of figure out the staff capacity side of things. And we hope to maybe get some additional staff at some point that can help, but that's a process as well.
So I see a question that maybe is better for Shannon to answer. Are the existing competitive grant programs continuing? For example, the public access program that has Proposition 68 funding.
We are going to, for every project, we're going to use this process that we've described. So we're not planning on having any more solicitations. So yes, we do have public access money. So if you have a project, submit a pre-app.
And the next question, I think what you'll see is that the pre-application is a form that you will download and fill out yourself and then basically email into us. So it's not going to be kind of an online system, and you know, instead you'll be able to just download it, fill it out to how you like it, save it for yourself, and then send us an email with that as an attachment. All right, I see another question that came in. Let's go to the queue, back to the Q&A. So general comment on just kind of the timing that the money needs to be spent. So for the general fund money that we got this year, we have 3 years to encumber it and 2 years to spend. So we're looking kind of within a 5-year time frame. And so if we get additional money in July, that also, at least for the general fund aspect, has that 5-year time frame. We do have other funding sources on different time frames, but we would be really clear with you as you got a project accepted or proposed to go to the board for approval, we'd be very clear on what the time limit is of the dollar amount that we're identifying for you to use. So it is relatively short that's because we know that restoration projects and sometimes acquisitions can take quite a long time to get implemented, but we'll continue to fight for as much time as possible on these dollars. But generally we've been limited to kind of this 5-year time frame. And then, for the money that we got last year, we're already a year into it. So it's really 4-year money at this point.
And for acquisition grants, generally they're only 1 year. But because WCB front loads all of the work before the grant, before the board meeting, it's usually not a problem to close an acquisition project within that 1-year time period of the grant.
Scott, can you take indirect one? I'll take the one after.
All right. So someone was a little bit confused about indirect cost. Thought someone said that they were not allowed, but they're separate ones. So yes, indirect costs are allowed. They are only allowed to be charged to the grantees, to hourly wages and fringe benefits. And that's it. So it cannot be applied to subcontractors. It cannot be applied to materials that you buy or supplies or travel or any of those other items. In the past, they were a little bit more lenient on that, but it's getting more narrowed on the focus. So I hope I didn't confuse that more.
The next question I'm trying to understand, can you please expound on the public access review criterion for proposed projects? I was referring to our public access program, which is for projects that provide or improve recreational access. Trails, fishing piers, boating access projects, things like that. So
I think I know, you jump in. I think they're talking more about like one of our overarching priorities is access for all, or to have access. And so we do understand that in some easements or even fee acquisitions, if we're really focused on biodiversity conservation and threatened and endangered species protection, that public access may not be necessary. So that's where I always kind of say public access as appropriate. But given one of our priorities is biodiversity protection and recovery of threatened and endangered species, there will be times where that access for all is not going to be applicable, or that we're not going to want public access to those types of habitats that are very sensitive.
Next question. Yes, multi-benefit projects are definitely things that we want. So that's, again, one of the nice things about, previously, maybe you could only submit an application if it only involved riparian restoration, but nothing else. This time, well, it might go to the riparian program. We want there to be other elements if possible. And if it, as Rebecca said, if it's appropriate.
Right. And so as many of these priorities that you can hit, the better. Like that's what we're saying, when it really checks all the boxes for us, where it's protecting, it could be protecting some teeny species. It could be restoring, repairing habitat. It also provides flood protection. It has a good monitoring plan, and there's going to be trails. Like that is kind of one of those big ticket, really makes sense for us, of that those rise to the top as high priorities.
The next question is kind of about our timing and being able to respond to folks. And if you are told no, can you reapply? So I think in genericness, at this point, we're hoping to get back to a reply to any pre-application within 45 days at the beginning, because we do anticipate being a little bit overwhelmed with our response. As we settle into it, we hope that our response times will be less than 30 days. And if your application is rejected, you will get some feedback from staff, and you can make the pre-application better, and you can submit again at any other time that you'd like.
Yeah, so that's the hope, is that, we can tell you what we think we need for, to meet our goals and priorities and be more competitive, but there also just may be other funding sources that are more appropriate. And so as we know those, we also share that type of information with folks and say, hey, this really seems like you should go to CAL FIRE, because this is a fire recovery project that they have funding for, so we'll have those types of conversations as well.
So Rebecca, can you say more about the types of projects that you'd like to support in urban areas or disadvantaged communities?
I think, we're just looking to do more in those areas. So whether that's park development, that's, developing public access, ADA access, but in areas that maybe historically we haven't worked as much in, we've tended to have a lot of projects that are more rural and habitat based. So, we're open to just expanding and doing more in those types of areas in those communities. And we look to you, to those, for how those types of projects really provide the fish and wildlife benefits, because when it comes down to it, we're still focused on benefiting fish and wildlife. But if we can do that more and in areas where we're supporting disadvantaged communities, we want to do that.
Yeah, I would think some examples of some projects that we have funded in the past that we would consider in the future would be more public outreach. If you have a park and you want to put educational material out there with signage to educate the public as they go through the park about wildlife, that would be something we could do. We've also done some daylighting of pipelines in urban areas so that the streams can have riparian habitat. And we've also gotten rid of some concrete rivers, essentially. Once they harden them, we soften them. So those type of projects, but I'm sure there's way more than that y'all can think about.
Yeah, and then going back to the desert program, we already fund projects in the desert. So we're definitely not waiting or not funding projects in the desert. We work with the Mojave Desert Land Trust and other nonprofits in doing acquisitions in the desert at this point. So we won't, it would be nice to see a dedicated amount for the desert program to really help us get up and running, and a designated person would be helpful too, but we won't be not implementing projects within the desert because we have done that on a continual basis.
Looks like another question came in via the Q&A. What is the typical time frame between board approval and signing a contract? So the grant agreement actually gets signed by the grantee before the board meeting, and then if the board approves the project, our executive director, Don Donnelly, will sign and execute the grant agreement. And after that, we wait 30 to 35 days for the statute of limitations for our CEQA documents. And then at that point, we'll issue a notice to proceed. So after board approval, you essentially can start your project within 30 to 35 days.
I think we warm out.
Other questions? We'll give you.
There's another one in the chat.
Okay. Transporting school groups to restoration and what do you think from the public access standpoint, Shannon, on that?
I don't know. I think that's something, I agree it's important. I think it's something we would need to look at the language of our funding sources to see if that's something that might be eligible. But agree, it's important. It's just not something the WCB is traditionally funded, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can't. And I think it's a good question to ask.
Yeah, I think some of the limitations in the past would be the fact we've been working with proposition funding would not allow something like that. General fund may loosen that up a little bit, but again, the money has a relatively short time frame that it could be used. So it would only be a few years of service, which I'm sure would be a great benefit to some locations.
Another Q&A.
No.
Do you know how much money is available this first year?
So I could speak to that in the sense that we have some existing bond balances. And then I mentioned we did get money in the general fund this year. And right now the biggest pot we have is for stream flow projects. But for anybody wanting to know our current balances and current fund sources, in our full agenda, at the front of every full agenda is a complete listing of our funding and how much we have left in each of those different funds. So that really is the best place to go to see what our balances are and what the fund sources are. You guys don't need to necessarily worry about the fund sources as much, but we have a good amount of existing money now. And like I mentioned, are expected to hopefully get another chunk of money in this next budget cycle. So there's not, yeah, you should just, do any pre-apps for what you are looking for. And then that's where we would do that consultation and let you know if we feel like we have the funding in hand to potentially help with that project. And for folks that if you're new to WCB, we have our next board meeting on May 24th. Am I saying the right date? And so that's going to potentially be, it will most likely be in person in the new resources building. And we're talking about whether or not we'll have call-in or hybrid options for that. So if you want to get notifications from us, you can go onto our webpage and hit the subscribe button on the top of our webpage. And that would give you an email. We don't send out a ton of emails, so we won't fill your email boxes, but that is what we use to send out notifications of our preliminary agenda, which will come out here in the next week or two. And then we send out a full agenda ahead of that board meeting. And that can give you, and that's also where you'll see the information on our funding, the information on all the projects we are hoping to get approved in May, and other data. So encourage you all just to sign up for the email list if you aren't on that already.
The May meeting is actually on the 26th.
Thank you. May 26th. I did not say 24th.
They should be early.
Okay, May 26th. Any other things in the chat we did not address?
I don't think so.
All right, so as we mentioned, we will post this presentation. So if you know somebody that had questions and they want to take a look at the recording, we'll get that up on our website as well as the slides. Here's the team right here. If you want to give us a call, happy to answer questions directly. And then we're very excited to develop projects and do good work and make progress on conservation in the state, make progress on those 30-by-30 goals, protect biodiversity, climate resiliency, all of those things. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. And look for the link on April 18th. Anything else from anybody else? All right.
Thank y'all.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.